From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm Tom Rogan. This week, we'll dive into President Trump's impeachment acquittal, the Iowa caucus's debacle, and more. Our panelists today are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, SiriusXM's Naira Hack, and Republican strategist Matt Makowiak. Okay, let's get to issue 1, acquittal.
I will only be one name among many, no more, no less, to future generations of Americans who look at the record of this trial. They will note merely that I was among the senators who determined that what the president did was wrong.
The Senate acquitted President Trump this week on 2 articles of impeachment. The 2 votes were as follows. On Article 1, abuse of power, 52 senators voted for acquittal, 48 senators for conviction. On Article 2, obstruction of Congress, 53 senators voted for acquittal and 47 for conviction. Apart from Mitt Romney on Article 1, all senators voted with their respective party.
So, Pat, impeachment is done, at least in the legal sense. Where does this leave us as we now go into the overdrive of the Democratic primaries?
Donald Trump has rarely had a better week than he had this week with the acquittal, smashing success of his State of the Union address, which touched every base in American politics. At the same time, the Democrats conducted that caucus out there in Iowa that looked like it had been put on by the Russian trolls of Vladimir Putin, a real disaster. And Nancy Pelosi, I think, sort of made something of a fool of herself by tearing up the speech, showing her petulance and her anger and the rest of it. And the polls, look at Trump's polls. He went from 39 to 49 in Gallup during impeachment. He's at 94% approval among Republicans. He's winning in the swing states or the key states right now in all the head-to-heads. So again, he's really had a better week, and the Democrats have really had a worse one.
Eleanor.
I have the high honor and distinct privilege of defending Nancy Pelosi. I think, first of all, there was the snubbed handshake where he clearly pushed his speech at her and she had her outstretched hand, which he ignored. Then she had to sit through an hour and a half of many falsehoods, outright lies, and a spectacle that you half expected people would be told to check their ticket. There might be a new car waiting for them in Statuary Hall. I mean, it was out of reality TV. She was struggling to maintain, I think, her pleasant composure through that. And I think that was a reaction of the moment. And I don't know that it helps in this fractured nation that we live in, but it sure felt good for Nancy Pelosi that moment and for the people who support her. As for the president, he said he couldn't believe that one word could be so beautiful. Total vindication. It's 2 words, but who's counting? And then he went on to, spew his vile comments at a prayer breakfast, calling out people, calling them names, and then proceeding to the East Wing of the White House, where all the sycophants gathered around him to applaud how he's behaving. So I think we have a glimpse of what's ahead. The knife fight is on.
Okay. Matt, it was interesting that National Prayer Breakfast that, obviously the president had come off the back of a significant win. But at one moment, Arthur Brooks, formerly of AEI, said, put up your hand if you, really respect someone from the complete opposite side of the political spectrum. And President Trump was one of the very few not to put up his hand. Do you think there is an issue here with the president that as much as he has these victories, he lets them go to his head slightly too much? And the success that perhaps he has in terms of his ratings because of the strength of the economy, things being relatively stable at the moment, at least at the moment in foreign policy, that he opens himself up to a degree of risk in appearing too arrogant?
Well, I think it's, we all enjoy, psychoanalyzing the president. Is his behavior appropriate or not? What about his Twitter account? You have to put yourself in his position just for 1 second and think about 3 years of merciless attacks on him. First Russia, the Mueller report, then leading to this impeachment and ultimate acquittal. That was a bit of a primal scream on Wednesday. Absolutely. And do I wish he had handled it differently? Yes, I wish he had. Do I think it'll matter? No, I don't think the prayer breakfast is going to matter in the 2020 national election. Your first question was about acquittal, about why we got there. The Democrats were 19 votes short of removing him from office. They did get the one Republican vote with Mitt Romney, which was a surprise to the White House. It was a surprise to Senate Republicans. But at the end of the day, the reason that the Democratic effort for impeachment failed is that it was not bipartisan. And Pelosi should have stuck to her original standard when her left flank was pushing for impeachment on the Russia issues. She said that impeachment had to be bipartisan. If she had kept to that standard, she could have avoided all of this. And to Pat's point, I mean, it's hard to remember a week in this presidency when Trump has had a better week. It's not just the State of the Union, not just the Iowa debacle. It's another good jobs report, over 200,000 jobs this morning. The Gallup poll showing him at 49, over a majority of 50% with independents. Things are looking about as good for Trump as we've ever seen.
Okay, Mayura.
It's interesting that in talking about primal screams and tantrums, I have a toddler at home. He's 3, and so I fully appreciate the emotion that comes with feeling that life is unfair. But I expect more from the President of the United States, right? That the idea is my toddler will eventually grow up and have a sense of gravitas and decorum, and that seems to be where we're at right now. Is both sides really doubling down on playing to their base and the people who want to feel that they are justified and the emotion is being validated. I don't think Trump won any new people with the State of the Union speech, or certainly not with the National Prayer Breakfast, and certainly not by him retweeting Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech, as opposed to using his massive platform to talk about and amplify exactly the things that he mentioned in his State of the Union. So I think it was a missed opportunity for the president. Clearly Pelosi, of all people, knows how to get under his skin. The National Prayer Breakfast, I think, was fascinating, especially given the other impeachment we have in this century, which is Bill Clinton. His performance was one of contrition. He came forward and talked about being a sinner and what it means, what repentance truly looks like and what that requires. We did not see that from President Trump. And we saw a very interesting contrast of conscience between him and how he approaches his identity and faith and talking about faith, and Mitt Romney, who really drew upon that, and maybe not the most courageous person, I would say, in the Senate. I would actually say that's Doug Jones for political reasons, but such a sharp contrast of how you use faith in politics.
But Mitt Romney does offer a sliver of sanity in our politics. He opens the door a crack for Republicans who came from that part of the Republican Party, which used to be the dominant part, the reasonable part, the part that gets elected to governor. And I think it's important that he took that stand. And it's obviously very sincere. And Pat knows as well as I do that Mitt's father, George Romney, was a big impact in his life. And George Romney stood up to the Republican Party on civil rights and other issues, also said he was brainwashed about Vietnam. So that the family has a strong streak of good conscience and faith. And the president, by mocking it, his children want to read Romney out of the Republican Party. I don't know quite how you do that. I don't think we do that in this country.
I had an article saying that was silly, that expel Mitt.
Let's go back in a little bit of history. His father, George, did something of the same thing. When Barry Goldwater won that nomination, Rockefeller and Romney and Scranton went out to that convention and had this extremism resolution which they wanted put through to compare the Birch Society with the Communist Party and the Ku Klux Klan. And they damaged Goldwater and they made themselves look good. And they never again, any of them, got back to any kind of success in the Republican Party, and deservedly so, in my judgment. Now, about Trump and about what's been said, okay, it is not, that's not my normal prayer breakfast I've seen up there with Dr. Billy Graham or something. But there is something about Trump, and you touched on it. It is an honesty about the moment. There's a real detestation between the parties here. And Trump has been beaten up and abused and kicked, and you would say, I'm sure he deserves it, more than any other president I've ever seen. And what this was a Kansas City Chiefs locker room after the game was over.
Yeah, that's the same attitude after the Access Hollywood tape, locker room talk. I mean Obama he doesn't get an excuse for everything.
Obama was well adored by Fox News and the right wing, as we well know.
Okay, let's bring in Matt.
So the question, I think, on impeachment is, will it matter? The Democrats and the Speaker believe, well, he's always impeached. Well, he's also always acquitted. The question is whether it's going to matter in November. And I think at the presidential level, I don't think it's going to matter very much. It'll be 9 months in the rearview mirror. Right. This broke down on partisan lines. I don't think anyone's opinion was really moved one direction or the other. Now, I do think it unified the Republican Party in a way that was very useful and will be long-lasting, much like the Kavanaugh Supreme Court battle unified the Republican Party. The way that I think it will matter is in the congressional races, where you had Democratic members in districts Trump won who had to walk the plank to vote for impeachment. They're going to have to appear far more partisan than they want to, and impeachment may come to to their time.
Where it's going to matter is the Senate races. The Democrats are already launching Operation Payback for the 9 Senate seats. Why is that
That's
funny?
Christian charity.
Operation Payback. The president said this is payback from the lectern at the prayer breakfast, and that doesn't bother you. But
no,
if the Democrats are going to launch,
no.
the Democrats are going to launch campaigns in all of these states and districts to remind the voters of how the Republican Senate, with the exception of Mitt Romney, was supine in the face of this behavior by the president that the Republican senators said was wrong. So, there's political opportunity here for the Democrats.
This is the substance of impeachment, I think, will make a very big difference to people as opposed to just the outcome, which people expected, and they had a cynical political perspective on it. This is very different than the Clinton impeachment, which many people were like, okay, well, that's a personal, gross issue there, and an indiscretion that belongs in private life. This was a president of the United States soliciting support from a foreign entity to investigate a political opponent. That is something we see in autocracies overseas.
And yet he's been acquitted.
And with a Republican crossing the aisle for the first time in the 3 impeachments that we've had, this is part of why I think and not only acquitted, but acquitted in a way in which there were no witnesses, there was no additional information, and in a trial that lasted barely even a week. I've heard from people around the country who are Trump supporters, had voted for Trump, or are middle of the road, not Democrats at all, who themselves were disgusted by this display and think this fundamentally undermines our democracy. We have another opportunity to exercise democracy in 2020, and I think that's the difference of this impeachment.
But that's a rerun of the trial, et cetera, that's all done. What Matt said is important, really. I mean, let's just look ahead. I've never seen the Republican Party so unified as it was in that room, even in that East room. And what's happened, Nixon reminded me that when I first came, and he said, we've got a lot of guys at different, liberal, conservative. After the first big bloody battle, they'll all be loyalists, which is true. Now, Trump has got a solid phalanx there. Okay, they're cheering like young guys, but they're all together in a way I've never seen the Republican Party before.
And here's the question, together for what purpose and to what end? Right? Is it winning for the sake of winning and maintaining power? What are you doing with that power?
It's a cult of personality here. It's all about Trump. And the one number that did get through is that 75% of the American people wanted to see more witnesses, and that didn't happen.
Okay. The expel Mitt movement is idiotic. That's going to be my concluding addendum to that issue. Issue 2, Iowa immolation.
The first Democratic presidential primary contest, the Iowa caucuses, descended into farce this week. First, results were delayed for days as the party struggled to handle a dysfunctional reporting app. Then, the New York Times reported widespread inaccuracies in the results as released. But according to those results, as accurate or otherwise as they might be, Pete Buttigieg is the narrow winner, with 26.2% of the vote and 550 delegates. Bernie Sanders is second, with 26.1% of the vote and 547 delegates. Elizabeth Warren is third. And Joe Biden is fourth, with just 15.8% of the vote and 331 delegates.
I should have clarified there that those are state delegates, not delegates to the actual convention entirely. So, good clarification. Eleanor, what is the key takeaway?
Well, first of all, the caucus system is outdated. And somebody had the bright idea, actually it was the Bernie Sanders forces who wanted to make the whole process more transparent. Okay, when you watch the sausage being made, it's not very pretty. They were supposed to have 15 minutes after the first round of voting to lobby other voters to join them. Well, the 15 minutes went on for hours. And then you had people who were not experienced with an app. You have mostly, older volunteers, and the app didn't work. So it was a total disaster. It makes the Democrats look terrible. But As much as I'd like to say Iowa doesn't matter at all, it still matters somewhat. And what we draw from this is that Sanders and Buttigieg were in a virtual tie, basically, and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are in trouble, which now leads us up to New Hampshire, where Biden and Warren have to significantly recover. I think Biden still has his firewall in South Carolina, and Pete Buttigieg, unless he can translate his support into support in the black community, doesn't have that clear a path to the nomination. Right. And Michael Bloomberg, for the narrow path that he sees to the presidency, that got a little bit wider this time, and the fact that he is pouring so much money into not only his candidacy but into the Democratic Party, and the fact that Steyer, the other billionaire in the race, has now put up the first negative ad. We now have the battle of the good billionaire versus the bad billionaire. I mean, it's a fascinating contest, and anyone except Pat, who will insist he knows what's going to happen, I don't think anyone knows how
let's go to Pat.
Well, I'll tell you, what happened out there was Joe Biden came in first, the most electable candidate, and his own people are nervous he could come in fourth as well in New Hampshire. Klobuchar is done after New Hampshire. She did that's her best state, and she ran fifth. Probably. She's going to be done. Warren is going to be beaten by Bernie in New Hampshire. It is now a Buttigieg-Bernie race. I think the two women are going to be out of this race, I think, by South Carolina. And after that, you get what's his name, Bloomberg coming in there. Buttigieg, Bernie, and Bloomberg. Those are the
Biden
three
is
are going
gone,
to go.
You think?
I mean, Biden, I don't see where he comes back.
Well, he's got to have these.
Let's continue.
Here's what it tells you about the Democratic Party, what folks are looking for, especially going into Iowa. The expectation so much in general conventional wisdom was that Biden would win or at least come in second. And it tells you that in Buttigieg and Bernie, people in the Democratic Party are yearning for new ideas. Right? It could be in an older package or a younger package, and Buttigieg, frankly, pulled a lot of votes away from Biden because he is a more of a centrist than the Warren or the Bernies. And so that is what people are looking at, more so than let's hear from somebody who says they will work with Republicans. Biden came in with a very strong general election message, but not appealing to the primary voters who, in the equivalent of Republican primary voters, think the system is broken and needs to be fundamentally changed. I think that's going to be a winning message writ large going forward. Super Tuesday is going to change everything, particularly the addition of Bloomberg. He's spending $6 million a day in political advertising. He's skipping all of the New Hampshire and Iowa shenanigans, and I call them shenanigans because it's part of an outdated system. Iowa and New Hampshire do not represent the American public writ large, let alone the Democratic Party of where it is right now.
Yeah, the two very whitest states in the union. It's not Joe Biden's constituency either. There are two New England senators competing in New Hampshire, so I think if Biden gets a strong third, I think he still goes on, because he clearly is the best positioned to combat the president in the fall.
Okay, let me ask Matt a question here. Is there a challenge for Democrats? Mike Bloomberg obviously has this sort of rising insurrection, but with Democrats talking so much recently about the idea, wealth inequality, etc., billionaires are bad, how do you coalesce the Bernie crew with the Bloomberg crew if it comes to that?
Yeah, I think there's a huge divide there. And, look, Bloomberg's spending and his background really play into a lot of the message that you see from someone like Bernie. Look, if you step back a second, you look at Iowa, you had $70 million spent on television between those candidates, probably $300 million all in for basically a no decision. The results, as troubled as they are, did provide some clarity, as Pat pointed out. This is now appears to be a Sanders-Buttigieg 1-2 race, with Bloomberg waiting on Super Tuesday. That does provide clarity. What it didn't do is it didn't provide the bump that it should have for those two candidates. They didn't get the bump they should have gotten.
In the other states.
Yeah, in the other states, leading into New Hampshire, the fundraising bump. Now, I do think with Biden, he's in a really, really tough spot. He needs to finish in the top two, I think, in New Hampshire to be able to keep going. He's almost out of money already,
right.
And there's really not much, as Pat has pointed out, where does he win? You got to win somewhere
He
to
wins
be.
in South Carolina, which is the first state
If he can
that
go long
has
enough.
a 60% African American
We do tend to skip over
voting.
Nevada.
Wait,
Excuse me. So there is a place where he wins, and South Carolina is not naturally, at this moment, appears to be all that hospitable
Tom,
to
back to
Mr.
your question.
Buttigieg.
Wait,
but I
let's-
want
quickly.
the black vote. The
Okay.
president made a big play for the black vote of the State of the Union, frankly. You have Bloomberg courting the black vote, trying to apologize over and over, stop and frisk. So the black population in the Democratic Party,
All right, Pat.
they're going to have the decision on this
Let's go
candidacy.
back to your question. There is no way Warren's people or Bernie's people, who are talking about billionaires running this country and the 1% doing everything, are going to sit still and let this guy, Bloomberg, with $1 billion buy the nomination of their party after they've been out fighting for a full year for it. I don't think they can get together behind Bloomberg.
Okay, Nia.
So interestingly enough, pretty much every single poll has shown that supporters for a variety of different candidates overwhelmingly by 80-90% said, yes, we will go blue no matter who. And that goes to the fundamentals of how people are feeling about this election and what's at stake. For Democrats in particular, what they see if Trump gets another 4 more years. I'm so glad you brought up the black vote, because that's something that Elizabeth Warren has really worked hard, and particularly with black women, who tend to be the base of the black vote, and appealing to them. So she may do better in South Carolina than people are predicting. Let's not also forget about Nevada, high Hispanic population, so it's going to be interesting to see who's able to compete there. But the Bloomberg quotient, again, he comes out as somebody who blue no matter who, and he is a direct contrast to Donald Trump. We have until July to get the party together.
Now, Yura, let me ask you a follow-up question here. Do you think President Trump is going to have any success? You saw imbued throughout the State of the Union, and quite skillfully in terms of the matching up with the Tuskegee Airmen, who's 108 or something, looks great.
100.
And
100, that's enough.
If you're only paying attention to the State of the Union when it comes to speaking to black people and black voters, then yes, it is appealing. Donald Trump was able to get 8 to 11% of black men voting for him, in large part because Hillary Clinton's negatives were so high. So I think that
black unemployment, though, is very good.
It's part of a broader trend that dropped 50% under Obama. So this is the other challenge with the State of the Union, the numbers and the facts in there. Trump wants to take credit for the best economy ever. Take the credit for the good stuff that's happened in your term, but it doesn't need to be to the denigration of what happened before. So black voters remember. They remember the Obama administration, and they remember that Trump has actually not been great on criminal justice reform.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Trump campaign absolutely believes there's an opportunity to raise his performance with African American voters. You saw that in the State of the Union. Opportunity zones. He went to Charlotte on Friday to talk about opportunity zones, criminal justice reform. You can say he hasn't done enough. He did sign the first major legislation to do that, bipartisan legislation. It's made a huge difference.
It's about the only outreach. I just want to say it's about the only outreach beyond his base.
All right, Pat, you have the concluding.
Well, on the black vote, I mean, Trump got about 8% of the black vote. We're not going for 55 or 60% of it. If he takes that black vote from 8 to 16%, a number of states start tipping towards the Republicans. I mean, and Republicans used to get that until the Goldwater years when we lost it all. And so I think that is what he's doing, and it seems to me it was extraordinarily effective what he did in the State of the Union and deliberately, consciously reaching out to the black community.
Pat, let me ask you a follow-up question there. Do you think that the Democratic primary race now, I mean, what would you say to Joe Biden if you were his chief advisor?
I would say, we're in real trouble tonight. You better
What's your advice?
You better have a good, strong debate tonight, or we could lose New Hampshire, run fourth.
You got it.
We could lose Nevada, and the firewall may fall apart, and we may be out of the race, as Buchanan said a long time ago, before March 1.
Okay. Now, some predictions. Pat.
Well, I go back to what I said. I think it's, by the time we get to South Carolina, it's Buttigieg versus Bernie with Bloomberg in the sidelines.
Eleanor.
I think, I agree Biden is wounded, but I think he's got enough money to continue. I also think Warren's got enough money to continue, and I think this race goes on, doesn't find a consensus candidate for some time.
Matt.
I think given that the Gallup poll showed Trump job approval at 49 last week, I think you're going to see it go higher, above 50 this coming week or the week after that, built on the strength of the very good week he had, State of the Union, the Iowa debacle. The private payrolls numbers on Wednesday were double what they expected, job performance on Friday. There is a limit. I don't think he's ever going to get above 55 or 60% in job approval, but if he can stay in the low 50s,
55 or 60,
really tough.
If he gets to 50, that would be amazing.
No, you're right.
Taking from Pat and Eleanor and going the next step, I think we're going to see a brokered Democratic convention, and brokered meaning that after 2000,
Contested.
After 2008, rules were changed. Superdelegates, if no clear winner comes after the first ballot, superdelegates can now weigh in, and I think it's going to be a very interesting Bernie. Maybe Buttigieg, but I go Bernie and Bloomberg. Bloomberg's going to be the wild card that messes up the convention.
Okay, and who do you think will get it if it gets to that point?
I think a Democrat's going to get the nomination.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it's up to the superdelegates and it's Bloomberg over Bernie,
Okay.
I'd
right.
say Bloomberg.
All right. In lieu of prediction, I'm going to give a shout out to CIA and the military for killing the leader of Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. That's a big story. They're the biggest or the best Al Qaeda syndicate, and we killed him. So that's good news. Anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget, the discussion continues online at McLaughlin.com, and check out our podcast on iTunes. See you next time.